You know that moment when your entire world just stops? When someone says something so unexpected, so completely out of nowhere, that your brain can't even process it. That's exactly where David Matthews found himself on a regular Tuesday evening in March. He was sitting at the dinner table, fork halfway to his mouth, when his wife Sarah looked at him with tears in her eyes and said 5 words that would shatter everything he thought he knew about their life together. "I have a daughter, David." Just like that, no warning, no preparation. The pasta on his plate suddenly didn't matter. The promotion he'd been excited to tell her about didn't matter. Nothing mattered except those 5 impossible words hanging in the air between them. David and Sarah had been married for 8 years. 8 beautiful, carefully planned years. They had a gorgeous home in the suburbs, 2 golden retrievers named Max and Charlie, and a life that looked perfect from the outside. They'd talked about having children someday, maybe in another year or 2 when Sarah's career was more stable. They'd planned everything together, made every major decision as a team. That's what made this moment so devastating, because this wasn't just some small secret. This was a whole human being, a daughter, and David had no idea she existed. Sarah was crying now, really crying, her hands shaking as she reached across the table toward him. "Please, let me explain," she whispered, but David couldn't move. He just sat there, his mind racing through their entire relationship, wondering what else he didn't know. How do you keep a child's secret for 8 years of marriage? How do you look someone in the eye every single day and never mention that you gave birth to another human being? Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. Smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because what happens next in this story is going to blow your mind, and you're not going to want to miss a single detail. David finally found his voice, though it came out hoarse and strange. You have a daughter. What do you mean you have a daughter?" Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes with a napkin. "I gave her up for adoption 17 years ago. Before we met, I was so young, David. I was only 19. 17 years ago. David did the math quickly. Sarah was 36 now, which meant she'd given birth when she was barely out of high school. He tried to wrap his mind around this. His wife, the woman he'd shared a bed with for 8 years, had carried a child, had given birth, had held a baby in her arms and then given her away. And never once, in all their conversations about their future, about starting a family, about their pasts and their dreams, had she ever mentioned this. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out quieter than he intended. He wasn't yelling. Maybe he should have been yelling, but he was too shocked for anger yet. That would come later. Right now, he just needed to understand. Sarah's face crumpled. "I was scared. I thought you'd see me differently. I thought you wouldn't want to marry me if you knew. I was going to tell you. I swear I was. But then we got engaged, and I didn't want to ruin it. And then we got married, and time just kept passing, and it got harder and harder to bring it up." David stood up from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He needed to move, needed to think. 8 years, Sarah. We've been married for 8 years. We've talked about having kids. We've talked about everything. And you never thought to mention that you already have a child out there somewhere." His voice was rising now, the shock giving way to something darker. Betrayal. That's what this felt like. A fundamental betrayal of trust. But Sarah wasn't done. "David, please sit down. There's more. More? What could possibly be more?" David felt his stomach drop. Sarah took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was steadier, more determined. "She found me, my daughter. Her name is Emma. She tracked me down through one of those DNA ancestry websites. She reached out 3 months ago." 3 months. David had to grab the back of his chair to steady himself. 3 months his wife had been in contact with this daughter, this stranger, and he'd known nothing about it. 3 months, he repeated. "You've been talking to her for 3 months and you're just now telling me?" Sarah stood up too, trying to close the distance between them, but David stepped back. He couldn't let her touch him right now. If she touched him, he might break completely. "I needed time to process it myself," Sarah said, her voice pleading. "I needed to understand what I was feeling before I could explain it to you. David, you have to understand, I thought I'd never see her again. I made peace with that decision years ago. And then suddenly there she was, this beautiful 17-year-old girl, and she wanted to know me. She wanted to meet her birth mother." There was something in Sarah's voice when she said that, something that made David's blood run cold. A kind of desperate hope that told him this conversation was about to get even worse. You met her? It wasn't a question. He could see it in Sarah's face. You already met her, didn't you? Sarah nodded slowly. Twice. We met for coffee twice. David, she's wonderful. She's smart and funny, and she has my eyes, and she's been through so much. Her adoptive parents, they weren't good to her. They divorced when she was 12, and neither of them really wanted her after that. She's been living with her adoptive mother, but it's bad, David. Really bad. She's not in a good situation. David could see where this was going now, like watching a car crash in slow motion. No, he said, shaking his head. No, Sarah, don't. But Sarah pushed forward, the words tumbling out now like she'd been holding them back for too long. She needs us, David. She needs a real family. I gave her up once, and I've regretted it every single day for 17 years. I have a chance to make this right. We have a chance. She could come live with us just until she graduates high school next year. Just 1 year. We have the space, we have the resources, and she's my daughter, our daughter. She could be our daughter. The room was spinning. David sat back down heavily, his head in his hands. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. You want to bring a stranger into our home, he said slowly. A 17-year-old girl we don't know, who you gave birth to but didn't raise, who has her own trauma and her own issues, and you want to just... What? Playhouse. Pretend like we're one big happy family. It sounded harsh when he said it out loud, but he was too overwhelmed to soften it. Sarah's face hardened. She's not a stranger, David. She's my daughter. And I know this is a lot to take in. I know I should have told you sooner, but I'm telling you now. I'm asking you now. Please, please help me do this right. I failed her once. I can't fail her again. The tears were back, streaming down Sarah's face, and David felt torn in two. Part of him wanted to comfort his wife, to hold her and tell her it would all be okay. But a larger part of him was screaming that this was wrong, that something about this whole situation was deeply, fundamentally wrong. That night, David slept in the guest room. He couldn't bear to lie next to Sarah, couldn't stand the thought of pretending everything was normal when his entire reality had just been turned upside down. He stared at the ceiling for hours, his mind running through every conversation he'd ever had with his wife, looking for clues he'd missed, signs that she'd been keeping this massive secret. How had he not known? How had she hidden something so huge for so long? And more importantly, what else was she hiding? The next morning came too soon. David hadn't really slept, just dozed fitfully between bouts of staring into the darkness and trying to make sense of everything. When he finally dragged himself downstairs around 7, Sarah was already in the kitchen, 2 cups of coffee poured and waiting. She looked as exhausted as he felt, her eyes red and puffy. "We need to talk," she said softly, gesturing to the kitchen table. David wanted to say they'd done enough talking, that he needed space, but he knew they couldn't just leave things where they'd ended last night. So he sat down, wrapped his hands around the warm coffee mug, and waited. Sarah had papers spread out on the table. Photos. David's breath caught when he saw them. A young girl, maybe 16 or 17, with Sarah's distinctive green eyes and dark curly hair. She was pretty, smiling in some photos, serious in others. There were screenshots of text messages too, dozens of them. "This is Emma," Sarah said, touching one of the photos gently. "This is our daughter." David flinched at the word "our," but he looked at the photos anyway. He couldn't help it. This girl, this Emma, she really did look like Sarah. The resemblance was striking. "I want to tell you the whole story," Sarah continued. "Everything from the beginning, and then I need you to meet her, David. Just meet her. That's all I'm asking. Just give her a chance." David wanted to say no. He wanted to tell Sarah that she'd lost the right to ask him for anything when she'd lied to him for 8 years. But there was something in her face, a raw desperation that he'd never seen before, so instead he just nodded. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me everything." Sarah took a deep breath and began. "I got pregnant the summer after I graduated high school. His name was Tyler, and I thought I was in love. We'd been dating for about a year, and I thought we'd get married, have this baby together, make it work somehow. But when I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared. Just completely ghosted me, changed his number, blocked me on everything. I found out later he'd left town, joined the military or something. I never heard from him again." Her voice was distant, like she was watching a movie of someone else's life. "My parents were furious," she continued. "We were religious, you know that. My family had all these expectations. They gave me 2 options, have the baby and give it up for adoption, or leave and never come back. They wouldn't support me keeping her. They said I'd ruin my life, ruin her life, that I was too young and foolish to be a mother." Sarah's hands were shaking around her coffee cup. "So I did what they told me to do. I had the baby, I held her for about 2 hours in the hospital, and then I signed the papers and they took her away. I named her Emma before they took her. The adoptive parents could change it if they wanted, but I needed her to have a name from me." David felt something softening in his chest despite himself. He could picture a 19-year-old Sarah, alone and scared, holding a baby she'd never see again. "I went to college that fall like nothing had happened," Sarah said. "My parents made me promise never to talk about it, to just move on with my life. And I tried. I really tried. I threw myself into school, into building a career, into becoming someone different from that scared teenager. And then I met you, and you were so wonderful, so stable and kind, and I thought if I told you, you'd see me as damaged, as someone who'd made terrible choices, so I just didn't tell you." It was a lot to process. David understood better now why Sarah had kept this secret, even if he didn't agree with it. But understanding the past didn't change the present problem. "And now she's found you," he said. "After all these years." Sarah nodded. "She turned 17 last month. She said she'd been looking for me since she was 15, but she couldn't afford the DNA test until she saved up her own money. She sent me a message through the website, and David, when I saw her picture, I just knew. I knew it was her immediately." "Tell me about the meetings," David said. He needed to know everything now, no more secrets. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through messages as she talked. "The first time we met at a coffee shop downtown, I was terrified. I didn't know what to say to her, how to act, but she made it easy. She was so open, so willing to just talk. She told me about her life, about how her adoptive parents had fought constantly, how her adoptive father left when she was 12, and her mother blamed Emma for everything. She said her mother told her she ruined their marriage, that if they hadn't adopted her, they'd still be together." David's jaw tightened. Whatever his feelings about this situation, no kid deserved that. "She's been essentially raising herself for the past few years," Sarah continued. "Her mother works nights and spends most of her free time with her boyfriend. Emma said she's lucky if they have a real conversation once a week. She's been getting herself to school, making her own meals, taking care of everything alone. She has good grades, though, really good grades. She wants to go to college, maybe study psychology or social work. She wants to help kids like her." The picture Sarah was painting was designed to make him sympathetic, David realized, and it was working, which frustrated him. "The second meeting was last week," Sarah said. "We met for lunch, talked for almost 3 hours. She asked about her biological father, and I told her the truth, that he'd left, that I didn't know where he was. She took it well. She said she'd figured he wasn't in the picture. Then she asked about you, about us, about our life, and David, she was so hopeful. She said it sounded nice, having a real family, having people who actually cared." There it was, the setup. The emotional pull designed to make him agree to this insane idea. "So you told her she could move in with us?" David asked, hearing the edge in his voice. "Without asking me, without even telling me she existed?" Sarah shook her head quickly. "No, I told her I needed to talk to my husband first, that this was a big decision we'd have to make together. But David, I also told her I wanted to try, that I wanted to be part of her life. I couldn't just walk away from her again. I couldn't." David stood up, packing the kitchen. This was impossible. How was he supposed to make a decision like this? A week ago, his biggest problem was whether to accept the promotion at work that would mean longer hours. Now he was supposed to decide whether to let a traumatized teenager he'd never met move into their home because his wife had kept a massive secret for their entire marriage. "I need to think," he said. Sarah, this is too much. You're asking me to just completely rearrange our entire life for someone I've never even met." "Then meet her," Sarah said, standing up too. "That's all I'm asking, David, just meet her, have dinner with us, talk to her. And then we can decide together. Please, I'm not trying to force this on you. I know I messed up by not telling you sooner. I know I broke your trust, but I'm trying to fix it now. I'm trying to do the right thing. Just give Emma a chance. Give us a chance." The pleading in her voice was almost painful to hear. David closed his eyes. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to say no, to put his foot down, to protect the life they'd built. But he also knew Sarah. He knew that desperate look in her eyes. And he knew that if he refused without at least meeting this girl, it would create a rift in their marriage that might never heal. "One dinner," he finally said. "I'll meet her. But Sarah, I'm not promising anything beyond that. One dinner, and then we talk about this seriously with all the cards on the table." No more secrets, no more surprises. Sarah's face lit up with relief and something that looked like triumph. "Thank you," she breathed, crossing the kitchen to hug him. David let her, but he didn't hug back. He still felt too raw, too betrayed. "When?" he asked. "When do you want to do this?" Sarah pulled back, biting her lip. "Tonight, she's available tonight. We could meet at that Italian place you like, the one on 5th Street. Neutral territory, low pressure." Tonight, of course it would be tonight. Sarah had probably already told Emma it was happening. David nodded slowly. "Fine, tonight. But Sarah, I mean it. After this, we have a serious conversation about our marriage and about trust and about what happens next." The Italian restaurant was busy for a Wednesday night, filled with the warm smell of garlic and the sound of clinking glasses and soft conversation. David sat across from Sarah in a booth near the back, his leg bouncing anxiously under the table. They'd arrived 15 minutes early, and Sarah had been checking her phone obsessively ever since they sat down. "She'll be here," David said, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring Sarah or himself. He still couldn't believe he was doing this. Meeting his wife's secret daughter. It sounded like something from a soap opera, not his actual life. "There she is," Sarah breathed, and David looked up to see a young girl weaving through the tables toward them. Emma. She was taller than she'd looked in the photos, maybe 5'7" or 5'8", with long, dark, curly hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore jeans and a green sweater that indeed matched her eyes, Sarah's eyes, and she had a nervous smile on her face as she approached. "Hi," she said softly when she reached the table. Sarah immediately stood up, and for a moment David thought she might hug the girl, but instead they just kind of awkwardly stood there until Sarah gestured for Emma to sit down. "Emma, this is my husband, David," Sarah said, her voice full of an emotion David couldn't quite name. Emma slid into the booth and extended her hand across the table. "It's really nice to meet you, Mr. Matthews," she said. Her handshake was firm, confident. David shook her hand and tried to smile. "David is fine," he said. "And it's nice to meet you too." It wasn't entirely a lie. The girl seemed polite enough, and up close, the resemblance to Sarah was even more striking. It was strange, looking at this young woman and seeing his wife's features reflected back at him. The first few minutes were awkward as they ordered drinks and made small talk about traffic and the weather. Emma seemed nervous, her hands fidgeting with the menu, but she was trying hard to make a good impression. David could see that. "So, Sarah tells me you're a senior in high school," he said, deciding to break the ice. Emma nodded, seeming relieved to have something concrete to talk about. "Yeah, I graduate in June. I'm actually taking a couple AP classes and working part-time at a bookstore. Trying to save up for college." "What do you want to study?" David asked. He could feel Sarah watching this exchange intently, like everything depended on it. "Psychology or social work," Emma answered. "I want to work with kids in foster care or difficult home situations. Help them navigate the system, you know. I've been through some stuff, and I think I could use that experience to help others." It was a mature answer, impressively so. David found himself warming to her slightly despite his reservations. Dinner progressed, and Emma slowly relaxed, talking more freely. She was smart, David had to admit. She talked about her favorite books, about a paper she'd written on behavioral psychology, about her plans for the future. She asked David about his work in software development and seemed genuinely interested in his answers. She laughed at his jokes and was respectful and articulate. Under any other circumstances, David would have thought she was a great kid. But these weren't normal circumstances. This was his wife's daughter from a secret past, and she wanted to move into their home. About halfway through the meal, Emma's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her whole demeanor changed. Her face went pale and her hands started shaking. "Sorry," she muttered, quickly silencing the phone and putting it face down on the table, but it buzzed again almost immediately and again and again. Sarah reached across the table, concern written all over her face. "Emma, sweetie, is everything okay?" Emma forced a smile, but David could see it was fake. "Yeah, it's fine, just my mom. She's probably wondering where I am." "You told her you were coming to dinner, right?" Sarah asked. Emma's laugh was bitter. "I told her I was going out. She doesn't really care where. She just likes to check in and make sure I'm not doing anything that might embarrass her." The phone buzzed again, and this time Emma grabbed it and quickly typed out a response. When she put it down, her hands were definitely shaking. David and Sarah exchanged a glance. "Emma," David said gently, "is everything really okay at home?" For a moment, he thought she might lie, might put that fake smile back on and insist everything was fine. But then her eyes filled with tears and she shook her head. "No," she whispered. "It's really not. My mom. She's not a bad person, but she's not a good mom. She resents me. She always has, and her boyfriend, he's not mean or anything, but he makes it clear I'm in the way. They want the apartment to themselves. They've been hinting that maybe I should find somewhere else to live when I turn 18 next month." She wiped at her eyes angrily, like she was mad at herself for crying. Sarah's hand was over her mouth, her own eyes glistening. David felt his heart constrict, this poor kid. Whatever complicated feelings he had about this situation, Emma herself was just a teenager dealing with rejection and instability. "I'm sorry," Emma said, trying to compose herself. "I didn't mean to dump all this on you, especially on you, David. This isn't your problem, I'm not your problem." But the way she said it, so resigned and hopeless, made something shift in David's chest. "Hey," he said, surprising himself. "You're not a problem, Emma. You're a kid who's had a rough time. That's not your fault." Emma looked up at him with those green eyes, so much like Sarah's, and he saw hope flicker there, dangerous hope. The kind that could get crushed easily. The rest of the dinner was more subdued. They talked about lighter things, but the mood had shifted. When they finished and walked out to the parking lot, Emma hugged Sarah goodbye, and David saw the way they held onto each other. Like Sarah was drowning, and Emma was a life raft, or maybe the other way around. After Emma left, driving away in an old beat-up Honda, Sarah turned to David with tears streaming down her face. "Did you see?" she asked. "Did you see what she's going through? David, we have to help her. We have to. I know this is hard and complicated, but she's my daughter and she needs us. Please." David stood there in the parking lot, the cool night air washing over him, and he felt the weight of the decision pressing down on his shoulders. He'd come to this dinner determined to keep his distance, to protect his life and his marriage from this disruption. But now he'd met Emma. He'd seen her pain and her strength and her desperate hope for something better. "Let me think about it," he said finally. "Give me a few days to process everything. This is a huge decision, Sarah. It's not just about dinner and good intentions. If she moves in with us, that changes everything. Our schedule, our finances, our entire lifestyle. We'd be responsible for a teenager we barely know. I need time to think about what that really means." Sarah nodded, though he could see the disappointment in her face. She'd wanted an answer tonight. She'd wanted him to say yes right there in the parking lot, but David couldn't do that. He needed space and time and clarity. That night, lying in bed next to Sarah, David stared at the ceiling again. But this time, instead of anger and betrayal, he felt something else. Confusion, conflict. Because part of him, a part he didn't want to acknowledge, actually wanted to help Emma. She seemed like a good kid in a bad situation. And Sarah was right about one thing: they had the space and the resources. They could make a difference in this girl's life. But at what cost? What would inviting Emma into their home really mean? And why couldn't he shake the feeling that there was more to this story than he was seeing? Something that didn't quite add up. Something that made his instincts scream caution, even as his heart pulled him toward compassion. Little did David know, his instincts were right. Because Emma's story, as tragic as it seemed, wasn't quite what it appeared to be. And the real betrayal, the one that would nearly destroy everything, was still waiting to reveal itself. David gave himself 3 days to think it over. 3 days of restless nights and distracted workdays, 3 days of Sarah's hopeful glances and careful silence, 3 days of the question running through his mind on an endless loop. Could they really do this? On the 4th day, he woke up and knew he'd made his decision. He found Sarah in the home office, typing away on her laptop, and when she looked up at him, he saw the anxiety in her eyes. She knew what was coming. "Okay," he said simply. Sarah blinked. "Okay," she repeated like she couldn't quite believe it. David nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, Emma can move in, but we're doing this the right way. We set boundaries, we set rules, we have regular check-ins about how it's going. And Sarah, if this doesn't work out, if it becomes too much, or if there are problems we can't handle, we revisit the decision. This isn't permanent unless it works for everyone. Agreed." The sound Sarah made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She jumped up from her chair and threw her arms around him, holding him so tight he could barely breathe. "Thank you," she kept saying. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. You won't regret this, David. I promise you won't regret this." But even as he held his wife, even as he felt her joy and relief, that small voice in the back of his mind whispered a warning he couldn't quite silence. Time would tell if Sarah's promise was one she could keep. Everything moved quickly after that. Too quickly, if David was being honest. Sarah called Emma that same day, and the girls' excited, tearful response apparently sealed the deal. They decided Emma would move in the following weekend, giving David and Sarah time to prepare the guest room and themselves for this massive change. Sarah threw herself into preparations with an energy David hadn't seen in years. She bought new bedding, new curtains, cleared out the guest room closet, and even repainted the walls a soft lavender because Emma had mentioned once that it was her favorite color. David helped with the preparations, but he moved more cautiously, still processing what they were about to do. He converted a corner of the room into a study area, setting up a desk and bookshelves. If Emma was going to live with them, she'd need a proper space to do her homework and study for college entrance exams. He installed better lighting and even bought a comfortable reading chair for the corner by the window. Despite his lingering doubts, he couldn't help but want to make this space welcoming. Emma hadn't asked for any of the circumstances that led her here. The weekend arrived, and with it came Emma and her entire life packed into 4 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases. David had expected more, but when Emma pulled up in her old Honda and started unloading, he realized with a sinking feeling that this really was everything she owned. Sarah had tears in her eyes as they carried boxes upstairs, and Emma looked overwhelmed, like she couldn't quite believe this was really happening. "This is all for me?" she asked when she saw the room, her voice small and disbelieving. "You did all this for me?" "Of course we did," Sarah said, pulling Emma into a hug. "This is your home now, your room, your space, your family." Emma hugged her back and over the girl's shoulder. David saw his wife's face transform with something that looked almost like redemption. Like by bringing Emma here, Sarah was finally forgiving herself for giving her away 17 years ago. David understood it, even sympathized with it, but it also worried him. Sarah's emotions were running so high, so intense. What would happen if this situation didn't work out the way she hoped? The first week was an adjustment for everyone. Emma was quiet, almost too quiet, like she was afraid to take up too much space or make too much noise. She'd slip out of her room in the mornings, make herself breakfast, and clean up so thoroughly you'd never know she'd been there. She studied in her room with the door mostly closed, only coming out for meals. At dinner, she'd answer questions politely but didn't volunteer much about her day. David found it all a bit unnerving, this ghost of a girl living in their house, but Sarah insisted it was just Emma being careful, not wanting to overstep. "She's been made to feel like a burden her whole life," Sarah explained one night after Emma had gone to bed. "She doesn't know yet that she's allowed to just exist here without earning her keep. Give her time. She'll come out of her shell." David nodded, accepting this, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Not wrong exactly, just off, like they were all playing roles in a play where only Sarah had read the script. By the second week, Emma did start to relax. She began leaving her bedroom door open while she studied, and sometimes David would walk by and see her at her desk, headphones in, completely absorbed in whatever she was working on. She started joining them in the living room in the evenings, curling up in the corner of the couch with a book while David and Sarah watched TV. Small changes, but Sarah treated each one like a victory, texting David excitedly from work. Emma asked if she could bake cookies later. She's finally feeling at home. The cookies were good, David had to admit. Emma made chocolate chip from scratch, and the whole house smelled amazing. She left a plate of them on the kitchen counter with a little note that said, "Thank you for everything," in neat handwriting. It was a sweet gesture, and David felt himself warming to her more. Maybe this would work out after all. Maybe his concerns had been overblown. Emma seemed like a genuinely good kid who'd caught some bad breaks. What was wrong with giving her a chance at something better? But then small things started to happen. Little things that David noticed but couldn't quite articulate as problems. Like the way Emma always seemed to need something just when Sarah and David were having a private conversation. She'd come downstairs for water, or to ask a question about homework, or to show Sarah something on her phone, and the moment between David and Sarah would be broken. It happened so often that David started to wonder if it was intentional, but that seemed paranoid. Emma couldn't know when they were having important conversations. Or there was the way Emma had started calling Sarah Mom after only 3 weeks. It happened casually one morning at breakfast. Emma had asked, "Mom, do you know where the good scissors are?" And Sarah had just lit up like Christmas morning. "I think they're in the junk drawer, sweetheart," she'd answered, not even commenting on the name change. But David had noticed. It felt fast, too fast. Emma had lived with them less than a month, and she was already calling Sarah Mom, when she still had an adoptive mother, however imperfect that relationship was. He mentioned it to Sarah that night, carefully, not wanting to sound like he was criticizing Emma. "Don't you think it's a little soon for her to call you Mom?" he asked. "I mean, she barely knows us, and she has another mother even if things aren't great there." But Sarah had gotten defensive immediately. "She has a woman who gave birth to her and a woman who adopted her but never really wanted her," Sarah said sharply. "I'm the first person who's actually tried to be a mother to her. Why shouldn't she call me Mom if that's how she feels?" David dropped it, but the exchange bothered him. Sarah wasn't usually so quick to snap at him, so quick to dismiss his concerns. But anything involving Emma seemed to short-circuit her normal reasoning. She was so invested in making this work, so desperate to build a relationship with this daughter she'd lost, that she couldn't see anything objectively anymore. And that worried David more than he wanted to admit. There were other small things, too. Emma's story about her adoptive mother seemed to shift slightly depending on when she told it. Sometimes the mother was neglectful and absent, sometimes she was critical and overbearing. The boyfriend was sometimes barely there, sometimes inappropriately present. None of the contradictions were huge, and they could easily be explained by Emma's emotional state when she was talking or just normal variations in how people tell stories. But David had worked in software development long enough to know that inconsistencies in data usually meant something was wrong with the source code. He felt guilty even thinking this way. Emma was a kid, not a program to debug, but he couldn't help noticing patterns. Like how Emma always seemed to have some small crisis right when David and Sarah were planning to do something alone together. The weekend they'd planned to go to a wine tasting, Emma had a panic attack about an upcoming test, and Sarah insisted on staying home to help her study. The night they had dinner reservations for their anniversary, Emma had gotten into a fight with her adoptive mother over the phone and was so upset that Sarah canceled their reservation to stay home and comfort her. Again, these were all reasonable things. Emma was dealing with genuine stress and trauma. Of course, she needed support, but the timing always seemed just a little too convenient. David tried to talk to Sarah about it once, suggesting maybe they needed to maintain some boundaries, some couple time that was just for them. "Emma needs us right now," Sarah had said, looking at him like he'd suggested abandoning a puppy on the highway. "She's been alone and unsupported for so long. We can have date nights later." "This is important." A month became 2 months. Emma settled in even more, and to anyone on the outside, they probably looked like a happy family. Emma's grades stayed excellent. She kept her room clean. She was polite and helpful around the house. Sarah was happier than David had seen her in years, constantly smiling, constantly talking about Emma's college applications or Emma's progress or Emma's plans. It should have been perfect. So why did David feel like he was slowly losing his wife? Because that's what it felt like. Sarah's attention, her energy, her emotional bandwidth, all of it was directed at Emma now. Conversations that used to be about their life, their plans, their relationship, now all circled back to Emma. When David tried to talk about work stress, Sarah would listen for a minute before saying something like, "That reminds me," Emma was asking about career planning. When he suggested a weekend trip, just the two of them, Sarah would say, "We can't leave Emma alone, she's not ready for that yet." They hadn't made love in 6 weeks. David knew because he'd started counting, wondering if Sarah had noticed too. But she seemed completely oblivious, too tired or too preoccupied every night. She'd fall asleep before he even came to bed, exhausted from her job and from the emotional labor of mothering Emma. David understood exhaustion, but this felt like more than that. It felt like Sarah was building a life that centered entirely on Emma, and David was slowly becoming a supporting character in his own marriage. The breaking point came on a Thursday night in late May. David had planned something special. He'd noticed that Sarah seemed stressed about an upcoming work presentation, so he'd ordered her favorite takeout, bought a nice bottle of wine, and sent Emma a text asking if she could maybe study at the library that evening so he and Sarah could have some alone time. Emma had responded with a thumbs-up emoji, so David thought everything was set. But when Sarah got home and saw the setup, the candles and the food and the wine, her first question wasn't how sweet or what's the occasion. It was, where's Emma? David explained that he'd asked Emma to give them the evening alone, and Sarah's face immediately clouded over. You sent her away, she asked, and there was an edge to her voice that made David's stomach drop. I didn't send her away, he said carefully. I asked if she could study elsewhere for a few hours so we could have a date night at home. Sarah, we haven't had time alone together in months. She lives here, David, Sarah said, and her voice was cold now. This is her home. You can't just kick her out because you want the house to yourself. David felt anger rising in his chest, hot and sudden. I didn't kick her out. I asked her nicely, and she agreed. And yes, she lives here, but so do we. We're married, Sarah. We're supposed to be partners. Doesn't that mean anything anymore? Sarah's eyes flashed. Of course it means something, but Emma is my daughter. She comes first. That's what being a parent means. The words hung in the air between them like a slap. Emma comes first. David felt something crack inside his chest. I'm your husband, he said quietly. Doesn't that count for something? Don't I come first sometimes? Sarah's face softened slightly and she reached for him, but David stepped back. You're right, she said. I'm sorry, you do count. You're important. I've just been so focused on making sure Emma feels secure and wanted. I haven't been paying enough attention to us. It was an apology, but it felt hollow. Like Sarah was saying what she thought she should say, not what she actually felt. David looked at the romantic setup he'd prepared, the candles already burning low, and he felt foolish. Forget it, he said, starting to blow out the candles. Let's just have dinner. You can text Emma and tell her to come home. But Sarah was already texting, her fingers flying over her phone's screen, and David saw the relief on her face when Emma responded. Relief that she didn't have to choose, that she didn't have to put David first after all. They ate dinner in near silence, the food tasteless in David's mouth. When Emma came home 20 minutes later, apologizing for intruding, Sarah immediately stood up to hug her and assure her she wasn't intruding at all, that this was her home and she never had to leave just because David wanted alone time. The way Sarah said it, like David was being unreasonable, like he was the problem, made him want to scream. Instead, he excused himself and went to bed early, leaving his wife and her daughter talking in the kitchen like he didn't exist. That night was a turning point. David couldn't pinpoint exactly when, but something shifted in how he viewed this entire situation. He stopped trying to make it work and started watching instead, observing. And once he started really paying attention, he saw things that made his blood run cold. Little things that individually meant nothing, but together formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Like the way Emma watched Sarah constantly, with an intensity that seemed more calculating than affectionate. Or how Emma always positioned herself physically between David and Sarah when they were all in the same room, inserting herself into every conversation, every moment, every interaction. Or how Emma's stories about her past kept changing, details shifting and morphing depending on what reaction she seemed to be looking for. David started keeping notes on his phone. He felt ridiculous doing it, like some paranoid detective in a bad movie, but he needed to see if he was imagining patterns or if they were really there. May 15th, Emma claims her adoptive mother hits her when she's angry. May 22nd, Emma says her adoptive mother never touches her, just screams and says cruel things. May 29th, Emma back to saying her adoptive mother gets physical sometimes, but now it's pushing, not hitting. The stories about why she wanted to find Sarah shifted too. Sometimes it was because she felt incomplete without knowing her birth mother. Sometimes it was because her adoptive parents were so terrible she needed to find her real family. Sometimes it was because she'd always felt like she didn't belong anywhere and thought finding Sarah would give her a sense of identity. All of these could be true simultaneously, David knew. Humans were complex, and motivations weren't always singular or simple. But something about the way Emma tailored each version of her story to her audience made David deeply uncomfortable. He started watching how Emma interacted with Sarah more closely too. The girl was good, he had to give her that. She knew exactly what to say to make Sarah light up, exactly when to be vulnerable to trigger Sarah's protective instincts, exactly how to play the role of the grateful, loving daughter who just needed a chance. And Sarah ate it up, every single bit of it, because she was so desperate to believe in this redemption story she'd created. One evening, David came home early from work and heard voices in the kitchen. He recognized Sarah's laugh, that specific bright sound she used to make with him before Emma arrived. Curious, he paused in the hallway instead of announcing his presence. "You're so much cooler than I imagined my birth mom would be," Emma was saying, and David could hear the smile in her voice. "Like, I was worried you might be all serious and disappointed in me or whatever, but you're actually amazing. I wish I'd known you my whole life." "Oh, sweetie," Sarah's voice was thick with emotion. "I wish that too. Every single day I wish I hadn't given you up. It was the biggest mistake of my life." There was a pause, and then Emma spoke again, but her voice was different now. Flatter. "What about David? Does he wish I was here your whole life too?" The question was pointed, and David held his breath waiting for Sarah's answer. "David is adjusting," Sarah said carefully. "This has been a big change for him, for both of us, but he's a good man. He'll come around." Emma made a sound that might have been agreement. "He doesn't really like me though, does he? I can tell. He watches me like he's waiting for me to screw up." David's heart started pounding. He did watch her, but he thought he'd been subtle about it. "That's not true," Sarah said, but she didn't sound entirely convinced. "David just needs time. He's very protective of our life, our routine. Having you here has disrupted that, but it's not about you personally." Emma's voice went small and sad. "Maybe I should go. Maybe this was a mistake. I don't want to cause problems in your marriage." And there it was, the manipulation so smooth David almost missed it. By offering to leave, Emma was forcing Sarah to reassure her, to prove that Emma was wanted, that Emma came first. "Don't you dare," Sarah said fiercely. "Don't even think about leaving. You are my daughter, you belong here. And if David has a problem with that, then David and I need to work it out. But you're not going anywhere. I already lost you once. I'm not losing you again." David felt like he'd been punched in the gut. If David has a problem with that, like he was the obstacle, like he was the one being unreasonable. He backed up quietly and left the house, going for a long walk around the neighborhood to clear his head. When he came back an hour later, he made sure to open the garage door loudly and call out a greeting so they'd know he was home. Sarah and Emma were in the living room watching a movie, looking perfectly innocent, and they greeted him with smiles. But David couldn't unsee what he'd witnessed. The way Emma manipulated Sarah's guilt and Sarah's desperate need for redemption. The way his concerns were dismissed as him not being supportive enough. That night after Emma had gone to bed, David tried one more time to talk to Sarah. "I'm worried," he said simply. "I'm worried about us, about our marriage. I feel like I'm losing you." Sarah sighed, and he could see the exhaustion on her face. "You're not losing me, David. I'm right here. But I need you to understand that Emma is my priority right now. She needs me in a way you don't. You're a grown man with a career and stability and confidence. Emma is a kid who's been rejected and abandoned and hurt. She needs me more." "What about what I need?" David asked, adding how small his voice sounded. "What about what our marriage needs?" Sarah looked at him with something that might have been pity. "I need you to be patient. I need you to trust me. This is temporary, David. Emma will graduate next month. She'll go off to college eventually, and then things will go back to normal. But right now, in this moment, she needs a mother, and I need to be that for her. Can you understand that?" David wanted to say no. He wanted to tell Sarah that their marriage couldn't be put on hold indefinitely, that her obsession with Emma was unhealthy, that something about this whole situation was wrong. But he looked at his wife's face, saw the determination there mixed with pleading, and he knew she wouldn't hear him. She'd made her choice. Emma came first, so instead he just nodded. "I understand," he lied. "I'll try to be more patient." But patience wasn't what this situation needed. What it needed was truth. And David was about to discover just how deep the lies went. The revelation started with something small and stupid, a college application essay. Emma had asked Sarah to read over her personal statement for her college applications, and Sarah had been so proud and excited that she'd left the printed draft on the kitchen counter. David wasn't trying to snoop, but when he went to get coffee the next morning and saw it sitting there, he couldn't help but glance at the first few lines. "The day I met my birth mother for the first time, I finally understood what it meant to be wanted. For 17 years, I'd lived with the knowledge that I wasn't enough for anyone to keep. My birth parents gave me away, and my adoptive parents treated me like an obligation rather than a gift. But when Sarah opened her arms to me, I finally came home. It was beautifully written, emotionally compelling, exactly the kind of narrative that would make admissions officers reach for the acceptance stamp. But something about it nagged at David. He read it again, then again, trying to figure out what was bothering him. And then it hit him. The timeline was wrong. Emma wrote the day I met my birth mother like it was this singular, transformative moment. But according to what Sarah had told him, Emma had reached out 3 months before Sarah told David about her. They'd met for coffee twice before David even knew Emma existed. So when exactly was this transformative first meeting? And why did Emma write it like she'd been living with the knowledge of being unwanted for 17 years, when she'd only found Sarah a few months ago? The essay made it sound like this had been a long journey of searching and yearning, but the actual timeline was much shorter and more abrupt. It was a small inconsistency, probably just artistic license for a college essay, but it stuck in David's mind like a splinter. He started thinking more about Emma's timeline and story. She'd said she'd been searching for Sarah since she was 15, saving up for years to afford a DNA test. But those tests weren't that expensive, maybe $100. And Emma had a part-time job at a bookstore that she'd mentioned multiple times. Why would it take her 2 years to save $100? Unless the timeline was wrong, unless she hadn't been searching for that long at all. David felt guilty for thinking this way, for picking apart a teenage girl's story looking for holes. But he couldn't help it. Once you started seeing inconsistencies, they were everywhere. He decided to do something he knew was probably crossing a line. He went into Emma's room while she was at school. He told himself he was just being cautious, just being careful, just protecting his wife and his marriage. But he knew the truth. He was snooping because he didn't trust Emma, and he needed to know if his instincts were right. The room was neat, almost obsessively so. Emma's bed was made with hospital corners, her desk organized with color-coded folders and carefully arranged pens. Her bookshelf was alphabetized. It was the room of someone who was very controlled, very careful about the image they presented. David felt worse about invading her privacy, but he pressed on, looking through her desk drawers with shaking hands. He wasn't sure what he was looking for until he found it. A journal, hidden in the bottom drawer under a stack of notebooks. David knew he shouldn't read it. Reading a teenage girl's diary was a massive violation of privacy and trust. But something compelled him to open it anyway, to flip through the pages and see what Emma wrote when she thought no one was watching. The first few entries were benign. Thoughts about school, about books she was reading, about college plans. But then David found an entry from February, about a month before Sarah had told him about Emma's existence. His heart started pounding as he read. Phase 1 complete. Made contact with S through the DNA site. She responded even faster than I expected, super emotional and guilty, exactly like Dr. Chen said she would be. Birth mothers who give up Bobbies always carry that guilt. It makes them easy to manipulate if you know what buttons to push. Meeting her for coffee next week. Need to make sure I seem grateful but wounded, hopeful but damaged. Can't come on too strong or she'll get suspicious, but need to make her feel like she can save me. That's key. She needs to believe saving me will save herself. David read the entry 3 times, his hands shaking so badly the pages rattled. Dr. Chen, phases, manipulation, this couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of fiction Emma was writing, some story or creative exercise. But as he flipped forward through more entries, his stomach turned to ice. S is even easier than I thought. Second coffee meeting went perfectly. Cried at all the right moments, told her about my terrible adoptive parents, and she just melted. She actually apologized to me, can you believe it, for giving me up, like she's the victim here. I almost felt bad for a second, but then I remembered what's at stake. Jennifer needs this. We need this. S has money, stability, a nice house, and a husband who seems successful. Everything we need to set up our next move. Jennifer, who the hell was Jennifer? David's mind was racing. He flipped through more pages, speed reading now, looking for more information. S told her husband about me today. She was super nervous about it, worried he'd be angry or refuse to meet me. I told her to give him time, to be patient, that I understood this was a lot. Playing the understanding, mature card. But honestly, I don't care if he's on board or not. S is already hooked. The husband is just an obstacle to manage. The dinner. David remembered that dinner, remembered meeting Emma for the first time, remembered her nervous smile and firm handshake, and the way she'd cried about her adoptive mother. All of it calculated, all of it performance. He felt sick. Moving in next week. Can't believe this is actually working. Jennifer said to take it slow for the first month, establish trust, make them think I'm just a grateful, sweet kid who needs help. The husband is suspicious, I can tell, but S is so desperate to play mommy that she's not listening to him. Actually, his suspicion might work in my favor. The more he pushes back, the more defensive S gets about me. It's like they're doing my work for me. Just need to keep playing the role, keep S attached, and wait for the right moment to move to phase 2. David snapped the journal shut, his heart hammering in his chest. Phase 2. There was a phase 2. This whole thing was a con, an elaborate manipulation, and Sarah was the mark. Emma wasn't her daughter looking for connection and family, or maybe she was Sarah's biological daughter, but that wasn't why she was here. She had an agenda, a plan, and someone named Jennifer helping her execute it. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and took pictures of the journal pages, every single entry he could find that mentioned the plan or Jennifer or manipulating Sarah. He needed evidence. He needed proof, because he knew Sarah wouldn't believe him otherwise. She was too invested in Emma, too desperate for this redemption story to be real. But maybe, with proof, he could make her see the truth before it was too late. David carefully put the journal back exactly where he'd found it and left Emma's room, making sure everything looked undisturbed. His mind was reeling. Who was Jennifer? What was phase 2? What did Emma want from them? Money seemed obvious, but this seemed like an elaborate con just for money. There had to be more to it. And what about Emma's adoptive parents? Were they really terrible, or was that part of the lie too? He had about 3 hours before Emma would be home from school. 3 hours to figure out what to do with this information. He couldn't just tell Sarah, "Hey, I snooped through your daughter's diary and found out she's running a con on you." She'd be furious about the violation of privacy and might not even believe the journal was real. She might think David had planted it or misunderstood, or was so desperate to get rid of Emma that he'd manufactured evidence. No, he needed more information first. He needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before he confronted anyone. David sat down at his computer and started researching. First, he looked up the adoptive parents. Emma had said their last name was Morrison, and they lived about 50 miles away in a town called Riverside. It took some digging, but he finally found them on social media, Karen and Robert Morrison. Their profiles didn't look like the profiles of people who'd gone through a bitter divorce and were neglecting their adopted daughter. Karen's page was full of photos of her and Robert at restaurants, on vacation, celebrating their anniversary. They were still married, still together, and in the comments on several posts, someone named Emma Morrison had liked and commented, wishing them happy anniversary, saying she missed them, asking when they could do dinner. The comments were from 2 months ago, right around the time Emma had supposedly moved in with David and Sarah to escape her terrible home situation. Emma Morrison. David clicked on the profile and his blood ran cold. It was her. Same face, same green eyes, but the girl in these photos looked completely different from the Emma living in their house. This Emma had bright pink streaks in her hair, heavy makeup, and a defiant expression. She was posing with friends, drinking at parties, making suggestive faces at the camera. The bio said she was 18 and attended Riverside High School. 18, not 17. Emma had lied about her age too. David scrolled through her posts, his horror growing. There were references to her crew, to running game, to making bank. And in several photos, there was another girl tagged Jennifer Hayes, Jennifer. David clicked on her profile. Jennifer Hayes was older, maybe mid-20s, with sharp features and calculating eyes. Her profile was mostly private, but from what David could see, she had photos with Emma going back months. Friends, definitely, maybe more. The few public posts were vague, inspirational quotes about taking what you deserve and playing the game better than anyone else. David sat back in his chair, his mind connecting the pieces. Emma and Jennifer were working together. This whole thing, the DNA test, the search for Sarah, the sob story about terrible adoptive parents, the move into their house, all of it was planned. But why? What was the endgame? He needed to know what phase 2 was before it happened. He looked at the time. 2 hours before Emma came home. He made a decision that he knew would either save his marriage or destroy it completely. He called Sarah. "Hey," she answered, sounding distracted. "What's up? I'm in the middle of a meeting." "I need you to come home," David said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Right now, it's important." "David, I can't just leave work. What's wrong? Is Emma okay?" "Emma's fine. She's at school. But I found something, Sarah, something about Emma, and you need to see it before she gets home." There was a long pause. "What did you do?" Sarah's voice had gone cold. "Did you go through her things? David, please tell me you didn't violate her privacy like that." "Sarah, please, just come home. Trust me. This one time, just trust me and come home." Another pause and then a sigh. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, but David, this better be good. If you're doing this to try to turn me against Emma, I swear." "Just come home," David interrupted. "Please." He hung up and sat in the silence of their house, waiting for his wife to come home, waiting to show her evidence that would shatter the dream she'd been living for the past 2 months, waiting to find out if their marriage was strong enough to survive the truth. Because the betrayal wasn't just Emma's. It was Sarah's too, in a way. She'd chosen to believe a stranger over her husband. She'd pushed David aside in favor of a girl running a con. And now David had to decide. Did he save Sarah from the truth or let her discover it on her own terms? Did he protect his wife or protect their marriage? In the end, there wasn't really a choice at all. The truth was coming, whether any of them were ready for it or not. Sarah arrived home in 15 minutes, not 20. David heard her car pull into the driveway with more speed than usual, heard the car door slam, heard her footsteps quick and angry on the front porch. When she burst through the door, her face was flushed and her eyes were already accusatory. "This better be good, David," she said without preamble. "I had to walk out of a presentation with our biggest client. So whatever you found, whatever you think you found, it needs to justify that." David gestured to his laptop on the dining room table. "Sit down," he said quietly. "Please, just sit down and look at what I'm going to show you, and then you can decide if it was worth leaving work." Sarah's jaw clenched, but she sat down, crossing her arms defensively. She was already preparing to not believe him, David could tell, already building walls to protect the narrative she'd created about Emma and their new family. But he had to try anyway. He started with the journal photos on his phone, handing it to her without comment. Sarah took it reluctantly, squinting at the screen. He watched her face as she read, watched the confusion give way to disbelief, then to something that looked like pain. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is Emma's journal. You went into her room. You violated her privacy, David. How could you?" "Keep reading," David said. "All of it. Then we'll talk about privacy." Sarah's hands were shaking as she scrolled through the photos, reading entry after entry. David had captured weeks' worth of Emma's journal, all the entries that mentioned the plan, that mentioned Jennifer, that talked about manipulating Sarah and managing David's suspicions. With each new entry, Sarah's face got paler, her breathing more shallow. When she finally looked up, there were tears streaming down her face, but David couldn't tell if they were tears of betrayal or denial. "This could be anything," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It could be creative writing, a story she's working on. Teenagers write fiction in journals all the time." David had expected this, the desperate scramble for alternative explanations. He pulled up the social media profiles on his laptop, turning the screen toward Sarah. "This is Emma's Facebook profile," he said. "Emma Morrison, the adoptive parents she told us about, the ones who were supposedly divorced and neglectful. They're still married, still together. And Emma comments on their posts, recent posts from 2 months ago, talking about missing them and asking when they can do dinner. While she was living here, Sarah, while she was telling us how terrible they were." Sarah stared at the screen, her fingers scrolling through Emma's posts with a kind of horrified fascination. "And look at her bio," David continued, adding that he had to do this but knowing it was necessary. "She's 18, not 17. She lied about her age. And look at these photos. Does this look like a girl from a traumatic home situation? Does this look like someone who needed to be rescued?" The photos showed a completely different Emma, wild and confident and calculating, nothing like the grateful, wounded girl who'd moved into their guest room. Sarah was crying harder now, her whole body shaking. No, she kept saying. No, 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 this isn't real. This is a mistake. There's an explanation. But David wasn't done. He pulled up Jennifer's profile next. This is Jennifer Hayes. She's tagged in multiple photos with Emma going back months. Emma's journal mentions her repeatedly. She's part of this, whatever this is. They're working together, Sarah. This whole thing is a con. The word con seemed to hit Sarah like a physical blow. She pushed back from the table, standing up so fast her chair fell over. Stop it, she said, her voice rising. Just stop. You're trying to ruin this. You've been against Emma from the beginning, and now you're manufacturing evidence to turn me against her. I can't believe you'd do this, David. I can't believe you'd stoop this low. Her voice broke on the last word, and David felt his heart breaking too. Not for himself, but for his wife, who was so desperate to believe in this redemption story that she'd rather think her husband was lying than accept the truth. Sarah, he said gently, standing up and trying to approach her, but she backed away. I know this is hard. I know you want Emma to be real, want this connection to be real, but you have to look at the evidence. You have to see what's right in front of you. Sarah shook her head violently. Emma is my daughter. The DNA test proved it. Whatever these photos are, whatever that journal says, it doesn't change the fact that she's my biological child. She came from me. That's real, David. That's the only thing that's real. I'm not saying she's not your biological daughter, David said carefully. The DNA connection is probably real. But Sarah, that doesn't mean her story is real. That doesn't mean her motives are pure. She found you for a reason, and it wasn't just to have a relationship. There's a plan here. There's a phase 2 that we don't know about yet, and if we don't figure out what it is before it happens, we could lose everything. Something in his words must have gotten through because Sarah stopped backing away. She stood there, tears still streaming down her face, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. The mother in her wanted to protect Emma, wanted to believe in her daughter. But the wife in her, the partner who'd built a life with David over 8 years, that part was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was right. What do we do? She finally whispered. If this is true, if Emma is really, if she's really running some kind of con, what do we do? It was the first time Sarah had even entertained the possibility, and David felt a rush of relief so strong he almost staggered. She was listening. She was actually listening. We need more information, he said. We need to find out what phase 2 is, what the end game is. And we need to do it before Emma gets home from school, which is in about 45 minutes. Sarah wiped her eyes and took a deep breath, and David saw her shift into problem-solving mode. This was the Sarah he knew, the capable, intelligent woman he'd married, not the desperate, guilt-ridden mother who'd been making bad decisions for months. The journal, she said. Are there more recent entries? Anything about what comes next? David shook his head. The last entry I photographed was from a week ago. It just talked about maintaining the act and waiting for the right time. But there might be more. I didn't read the whole thing, just took pictures of what seemed relevant. Need to read it all, Sarah said, her voice steadier now. Every page, and we need to look through her other things. If she's planning something, there might be more evidence in her room. David hesitated. Sarah, if we go through all her stuff and she finds out there's no coming back from that, she'll know we're on to her. Sarah's face hardened in a way David had never seen before. Good, she said coldly. Let her know. Let's see how she plays it when she realizes we're not as easy to manipulate as she thought. They went upstairs together, and David showed Sarah where the journal was hidden. Sarah pulled it out with shaking hands and started reading from the beginning while David searched the rest of the room. He went through her closet, her desk drawers, her backpack, looking for anything that might give them more information. What he found made his blood run cold. Hidden in a shoebox in the back of Emma's closet was a file folder full of documents. David pulled it out and opened it, his stomach sinking with each new page. There were printouts of Sarah's financial information, bank statements that somehow Emma had accessed. There were property records for their house, showing its value and equity. There were life insurance policy details, including the fact that Sarah had a policy worth $500,000 with David as the beneficiary. But the worst thing, the thing that made David's hands shake so badly he almost dropped the folder, was a document from a lawyer's office. A contract, unsigned but prepared, ready to go. The contract was for Sarah to add Emma as a beneficiary on her life insurance policy and to include Emma in her will, splitting everything 3 ways between David, Emma, and any future children. It was dated for next week. "Sarah," David called out, his voice hoarse. "Sarah, you need to see this." Sarah looked up from the journal, her face already pale from whatever she'd been reading. When David handed her the folder and she saw the contents, she actually gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Oh my God, David, she was going to ask me to change my will. That's phase 2. She was going to make me put her in my will." "And your life insurance," David added. "Look at the policy details. Someone researched your policy, found out it's worth $500,000. Sarah, this isn't just about conning us out of money for college or living expenses. This is bigger, much bigger." Sarah was shaking her head in disbelief, flipping through the documents. "But how would she even benefit from my life insurance? The policy pays out on my death, unless—" She stopped, her face going from pale to green. The implication hung in the air between them, too terrible to speak out loud. But it was there, impossible to ignore. If Emma got Sarah to change her beneficiaries, and then something happened to Sarah, Emma would benefit financially. It seemed crazy, seemed like something from a crime drama, not real life. But the evidence was right there in black and white. Someone had researched Sarah's assets very thoroughly. Someone had prepared legal documents to change Sarah's will. Someone had a plan that extended beyond just living in their house and playing happy family. "We need to call the police," David said, but Sarah shook her head. "And tell them what? That our maybe daughter has researched my finances, that she has documents about changing a will that I haven't even agreed to change. We don't have proof of an actual crime, David, just suspicious behavior and creepy preparation. The police won't do anything." She was right, and David knew it. They needed more. They needed Emma to actually make a move, to actually commit to whatever plan she and Jennifer had cooked up. "We set a trap," David said, the idea forming even as he spoke. "We let Emma think everything is fine, we pretend we don't know anything, and we wait for her to make her move to ask you to change your will or whatever the next step is. But this time we'll be ready, we'll record it, we'll gather real evidence, and then we'll have her." Sarah looked at him with something between admiration and fear. "You want to play along, pretend we still trust her. David, I don't know if I can do that. Now that I know what she is, how can I look at her and pretend?" "Because we have to," David said firmly. "Because if we confront her now, she'll just deny everything. She'll say we're misinterpreting things, that we violated her privacy, that we're trying to get rid of her. And you know what? Part of you will want to believe her. Part of you will still want this to be real. But if we wait, if we let her incriminate herself, then there's no room for doubt. Then we'll know for sure, and we can end this the right way." Sarah stared at the folder of documents in her hands, then at the journal David had photographed, then at the neat, carefully curated bedroom that Emma had created. "She's good," Sarah said quietly. "She's really good. She knew exactly what to say, exactly how to act. She played me perfectly." Her voice broke again, and this time it wasn't denial or fear. It was grief. Grief for the daughter she'd thought she'd found, for the redemption she'd thought she'd earned, for the fantasy of the happy family that had never been real. David pulled his wife into his arms, and she sobbed against his chest, her whole body shaking with the force of her crying. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry, David. You tried to tell me something was wrong and I didn't listen. I chose her over you. I believed a stranger over my husband. How can you ever forgive me?" David held her tighter, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. "We'll get through this," he promised. "Together, we'll get through this and we'll come out stronger. But first, we need to finish this. We need to stop her before she does whatever she's planning." They heard a car pull into the driveway. Emma was home. Sarah pulled back from David, quickly wiping her eyes and trying to compose herself. "How do I do this?" she asked desperately. "How do I look at her and act normal?" David cupped her face in his hands. "You're one of the strongest people I know," he said. "You can do this, just for a little while, just until we have what we need." Sarah nodded, taking a deep, shuddering breath. They quickly put everything back exactly as they'd found it. The journal in the bottom drawer, the folder in the shoebox, everything neat and undisturbed. Then they hurried downstairs, trying to look casual, trying to look like nothing had changed. Emma came through the front door with her usual bright smile, dropping her backpack by the stairs. "Hey, Mom, hey, David," she called out cheerfully. "How was your day?" The casual use of Mom made David's skin crawl now that he knew the truth, but Sarah managed a smile. "Good," she said, and her voice only shook a little. "How was school?" Emma launched into a story about a test she'd aced and a college acceptance letter she was waiting for, and David watched her performance with new eyes. She was good. She was really, really good. Every smile was calculated, every gesture designed to seem genuine and warm. She touched Sarah's arm at just the right moments, made just enough self-deprecating jokes to seem humble, asked just enough questions about their day to seem interested. It was a flawless performance, and if David hadn't seen the evidence in her room, he never would have known it was an act. That night after Emma had gone to bed, David and Sarah sat in their bedroom with the door locked and spoke in whispers about their plan. They would wait. They would watch. They would gather evidence. And when Emma finally made her move, when she showed her true intentions, they would be ready. Not just to protect themselves, but to make sure Emma and Jennifer faced consequences for what they'd done. David set up a hidden camera in the living room, one of those nanny cams that looked like a regular household object. He set up another one in the kitchen. If Emma was going to ask Sarah to change her will or her insurance, it would probably happen in one of those rooms. Sarah backed up all her financial accounts with new passwords Emma couldn't access, and she made copies of all her current legal documents, storing them in a safe deposit box at the bank. They were preparing for battle, and this time they wouldn't be caught off guard. The trap was set, and now all they had to do was wait for Emma to walk into it. It didn't take long. 3 days after David and Sarah discovered the truth, Emma made her move. It was a Saturday morning, and David had conveniently scheduled himself to be out of the house, claiming he needed to run errands and would be gone for a few hours. In reality, he was parked 2 blocks away, watching the hidden camera feeds on his phone, recording everything. Emma waited until she heard David's car pull out of the driveway. Then she came downstairs, where Sarah was in the kitchen making coffee, and her whole demeanor was different. Less bubbly, more serious. "Mom," she said, and there was a weight to the word. "Can we talk? There's something important I need to discuss with you." Sarah turned, and David saw her stiffen almost imperceptibly through the camera feed, but her voice was calm when she responded. "Of course, sweetie. What's on your mind?" Emma sat down at the kitchen table, and Sarah joined her, cradling her coffee mug like it was a lifeline. Emma took a deep breath, and when she spoke, there were tears in her eyes, real tears, or at least very convincing fake ones. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," Emma began, "about college and my life after high school and everything, and I realized something that's been bothering me." She paused, wiping at her eyes. "I don't have anyone, Mom. I don't have a safety net. If something happens to me, if I get sick or hurt or run into trouble, there's no one looking out for me. Not really." Sarah's hand tightened around her mug. "You have me," she said. "You have us, David and me. We're looking out for you." Emma smiled sadly. "I know you say that, and I believe you mean it right now in this moment. But Mom, what if something changes? What if you and David decide this isn't working? What if you decide I'm too much trouble? I have no legal protection, no security. I'm not really part of this family in any official way." "Here it comes," David thought, watching the screen intently. The setup, the manipulation. "What are you saying, Emma?" Sarah asked, and David was proud of how steady her voice stayed. "What do you want?" Emma pulled out a folder from under her placemat where she must have hidden it before coming downstairs. The same folder David had found in her closet. "I found this lawyer," Emma said. "She specializes in family law, and she said that since I'm 18, we could make our relationship official. Not adoption, since I'm an adult, but legal guardianship or something similar. And she said we should update your estate planning to include me, so that if anything ever happened to you, I'd be taken care of." She slid the folder across the table to Sarah, and David zoomed in the camera as much as he could. "It's just paperwork," Emma continued. "Just making official what's already true in our hearts, that I'm your daughter, that I'm part of this family. And Mom, if something ever happened to you, God forbid, I'd have the resources to finish college to build a life. I wouldn't be alone again. I'd have something from you, something permanent." The manipulation was masterful, David had to admit, framing it as Emma being afraid of abandonment, as wanting security and permanence, when really she was asking Sarah to put her in the will and make her a beneficiary on a $500,000 life insurance policy. Sarah opened the folder slowly, looking at the documents like they might bite her. "This is very detailed," she said carefully. "You've put a lot of thought into this." "I have," Emma admitted. "Because you matter to me, Mom. This family matters to me. I don't want to lose it, and I thought, I thought if we made it official, if we made it legal, then I'd never have to worry about losing you again." The tears were flowing freely now, and Emma reached across the table to take Sarah's hand. "Please, Mom, please consider it. Talk to David about it. I know it's a big step, but it would mean everything to me. It would mean I finally, truly belong somewhere." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, and for a moment David worried she might actually be falling for it again, might be getting drawn back into the manipulation. But then she looked up at Emma, and her eyes were hard. "You're right," Sarah said quietly. "This is a big step, and it's not something I can decide without talking to my husband. Why don't you let me and David discuss this, and we'll get back to you?" Emma's face flickered with something, annoyance maybe, or frustration that Sarah wasn't agreeing immediately. But she covered it quickly with a grateful smile. "Of course," Emma said. "Take all the time you need. I just wanted to put it out there, let you know what I was thinking. There's no pressure, Mom. I just want to be sure of my place in your life." She squeezed Sarah's hand one more time, then stood up and took the folder back. "I'm going to go study in my room. Let me know when you and David have had a chance to talk." She left the kitchen, and David watched Sarah sit there alone, staring at her coffee, her hands shaking. David waited 5 minutes to make sure Emma was really upstairs, then he drove back home. He found Sarah still sitting at the kitchen table, and when she saw him, she just shook her head. "She's unbelievable," Sarah whispered. "The way she framed it, like she's the vulnerable one, like she's afraid of being abandoned, when really she's asking me to make her a beneficiary so she and her friend can. Can what, David? What's the end game here? Do they actually think they can somehow? That they would?" She couldn't bring herself to say it, but David could. "Hurt you," he said bluntly. "Make it look like an accident or natural causes. Collect the insurance money and disappear. Sarah, I think that's exactly what they're planning." Sarah's face crumpled. "But I'm her mother," she said, her voice breaking. "I gave birth to her. How could she even think about doing something like that to me?" David knelt beside her chair and took her hands in his. "Because she's not thinking of you as her mother," he said gently. "She's thinking of you as a mark, as a means to an end. Whatever biological connection you have, it doesn't mean anything to her. You're just someone with money and assets that she wants access to." It was harsh, but it was true, and Sarah needed to hear it. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We have her on camera asking me to change my will. Is that enough?" David shook his head. "Not quite. She didn't explicitly threaten you or admit to any crime. A good lawyer would say she's just a young woman trying to secure her future, trying to feel like part of the family. We need more. We need to find Jennifer. We need to get them together, get them talking about their plan. That's when they'll incriminate themselves." Sarah took a shaky breath. "How do we do that?" David pulled out his phone, pulling up Jennifer's Facebook profile. "We set up another trap," he said, "but this time we go on the offensive." Over the next few hours, David and Sarah crafted their plan. They would tell Emma that Sarah was considering her request, that she wanted to make Emma feel secure and part of the family. They would say Sarah had an appointment with her lawyer next week to discuss updating her will and life insurance. They would make Emma think she was winning, that phase 2 was proceeding perfectly. And in the meantime, David would track down Jennifer Hayes and figure out how to draw her out, how to get her and Emma together, where they could be recorded talking about their real intentions. Sarah went upstairs and knocked on Emma's door. "Come in," Emma called, and Sarah pushed open the door to find Emma at her desk, textbooks spread around her in a perfect imitation of a studious high school senior. "Hey, sweetie," Sarah said, and the endearment tasted like ash in her mouth now. "I talked to David about what you brought up this morning, and we want you to know that we understand where you're coming from. You deserve to feel secure and wanted." Emma's face lit up with genuine-seeming excitement. "Really? You mean it?" Sarah nodded. "I have an appointment with my lawyer next Thursday to discuss updating my estate plan. I want to make sure you're included, that you're taken care of, because you're right. You're my daughter. You should be part of my plans for the future." Emma jumped up and hugged Sarah tightly, and Sarah had to force herself not to recoil. This girl, this stranger, was planning something terrible, and Sarah had to hug her back and pretend everything was fine. "Thank you, Mom," Emma breathed. "Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to me." But Sarah thought she did know. It meant Emma's plan was working. It meant she and Jennifer were one step closer to whatever they were trying to accomplish. "Why don't you invite your friend Jennifer over for dinner this week?" Sarah suggested, pulling back from the hug. You've mentioned her a few times, and I'd love to meet the people who are important to you. Maybe Wednesday night. Something flickered across Emma's face, too fast for Sarah to identify. Jennifer, she repeated. I don't think I've mentioned her. But she had in her journal, in her social media posts. Sarah smiled blandly. Maybe I'm thinking of someone else. Don't you have a friend named Jennifer? I thought I saw her tagged in some of your photos. Emma's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. How did you see my photos? I don't have you on Facebook. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression innocent. Don't I? I thought I did. Or maybe I was looking you up trying to see what my daughter posts about. Is that weird? I'm still figuring out this whole mom thing. She laughed, self-deprecating, and after a moment Emma laughed too, but it sounded forced. No, it's not weird, Emma said. And yeah, Jennifer is a friend from my old school. I guess I could ask if she wants to come to dinner. That would be nice. Perfect, Sarah said. I'll plan something special. It'll be fun. She left Emma's room and went straight to her own bedroom where David was waiting. She suspects something, Sarah said immediately. I slipped up, mentioned Jennifer when I shouldn't have known that name. David, she looked at me different, like she's questioning whether I know more than I'm letting on. David swore under his breath. We need to move faster then. If Emma's getting suspicious, she might change the plan or bail entirely. When is she supposed to ask Jennifer to dinner? Wednesday, Sarah said. But I don't know if Jennifer will actually come. If Emma warns her that something's off, she might stay away. David thought for a moment, then pulled out his laptop. Then we don't wait for Wednesday. We force the meeting sooner. I'm going to send Jennifer a message, catfishing her. Make her think it's from Emma, that they need to meet urgently. If I can get them together somewhere public, somewhere I can record them talking, we might get the evidence we need. It was risky, but they were running out of options. David created a fake Facebook account, made it look like Emma's real account, and sent Jennifer a message. Need to meet ASAP. Mom's getting suspicious. Think she went through my stuff. Phase 2 needs to happen sooner than planned. Can you meet me at the Coffee Bean on Main Street tomorrow at 2 p.m.? Come alone. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. They waited, David refreshing the page every few seconds. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then, finally, a response popped up. What do you mean she's suspicious? How much does she know, and why are you messaging from a different account? David quickly typed back. My real account isn't secure, just meet me tomorrow and I'll explain everything. 2 p.m., don't be late. Another agonizing wait, and then, fine, 2 p.m. But Emma, if you've screwed this up, if you've put us at risk, there will be consequences. David felt a chill run down his spine at the implied threat in those words. Consequences? What kind of consequences? What were these women really capable of? He showed Sarah the messages and she went pale. Tomorrow at 2, she said. How do we record them without being seen? David was already thinking about that. I'll go to the coffee shop early, set up in a corner booth with my laptop, look like I'm working. They won't notice me. And I'll have my phone recording audio in my pocket, backup in case anything goes wrong. I'm coming with you, Sarah said immediately. No way am I sitting at home while you do this alone. David wanted to argue, wanted to keep Sarah safe and away from whatever was about to happen, but he saw the determination in her face and knew she wouldn't be dissuaded. Okay, he agreed. But we go in separately, sit separately. We can't let them know we're together. And Sarah, if things go wrong, if they figure out it's a setup, you run. You get out of there and call the police. Promise me. Sarah promised, though David wasn't sure she meant it. They spent the rest of the evening preparing, going over the plan again and again, trying to account for every variable. Emma stayed in her room, and at dinner she seemed quieter than usual, more watchful. She kept looking at Sarah with an expression David couldn't quite read. Suspicion, calculation, fear, whatever it was, it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. They were playing a dangerous game now, and if Emma and Jennifer figured out what was happening, there was no telling how they might react. That night, David barely slept. He kept thinking about those messages, about the word consequences, about what Jennifer and Emma might be capable of if they felt cornered. He thought about the life insurance policy, about the documents preparing to change Sarah's will, about how far these women had already gone in their con. Would they really hurt Sarah if they thought they were about to be exposed? Or was he being paranoid, seeing danger where there was only greed and manipulation? He didn't know, but tomorrow at 2 o'clock he'd find out. The Coffee Bean on Main Street was moderately busy at 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, which was exactly what David had hoped for. Busy enough that he and Sarah could blend in, but not so crowded that they couldn't hear a conversation happening a few tables away. David had arrived at 1:30, claimed a corner booth with a good view of the entrance, and set up his laptop like he was working. Sarah came in 10 minutes later and sat at the counter, ordering a latte and pulling out a book like she was there for a quiet afternoon of reading. At exactly 2 o'clock, Jennifer Hayes walked through the door. David recognized her immediately from her Facebook photos, though in person she looked harder somehow, more calculating. She was in her mid-20s, dressed expensively in designer jeans and a leather jacket, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She scanned the coffee shop with sharp eyes, looking for Emma, and David held his breath, hoping she wouldn't recognize that Emma wasn't there. Jennifer's phone buzzed and she pulled it out, frowning at the screen. David had sent one more message from the fake account. "Running 5 minutes late. Order me a coffee and I'll be right there." Jennifer's frown deepened, but she got in line to order. David's own phone was recording in his shirt pocket, and he had a second phone propped against his coffee cup, camera aimed at where Jennifer was sitting. Everything was in place. Now they just needed Emma to show up, and they'd have both women together, hopefully talking about their plan. But 10 minutes passed, then 15, and Emma didn't appear. Jennifer was getting visibly agitated, checking her phone constantly, looking at the door with increasing irritation. David felt sweat forming on the back of his neck. What if Emma didn't come? What if she'd somehow figured out the message wasn't really from her? What if she was at home right now, going through her room, discovering that things had been moved, that her journal and documents had been disturbed? At 2:20, Jennifer stood up, clearly about to leave. David made a split-second decision. He couldn't let her walk away, not when they were this close. He stood up too, moving to intercept her path to the door. "Excuse me," he said, and Jennifer turned to look at him with annoyed confusion. "Do I know you?" she asked, her voice cold. David put on his most apologetic smile. "No, sorry, I don't think so. I just thought I overheard you mention Emma, and I know an Emma, so I wondered if it was the same person. Small world, right?" Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "What Emma are you talking about?" David's mind raced. "Emma Morrison, she's staying with my wife and me. You're Jennifer Hayes, right? Emma mentioned you, said you two were friends." The change in Jennifer's expression was instantaneous. The cold confusion transformed into something much more dangerous. "You're David," she said, and it wasn't a question. "You're Sarah's husband. What the hell are you doing here?" David felt his pulse spike, but he kept his expression friendly and confused. "I'm just getting coffee. What are you doing here? Were you supposed to meet Emma? Is she okay?" But Jennifer was already backing away, pulling out her phone. "You sent those messages," she said, her voice low and furious. "You're catfishing me. Where's Emma? What did you do to her?" Her voice was rising now, drawing attention from other customers. "I didn't do anything," David said, which was technically true. "I'm just concerned about Emma and about my wife, and about why you and Emma have documents about changing Sarah's will and life insurance." The words were out before he could stop them, and Jennifer's face went white, then red. "You went through her things," she hissed. "You had no right. That's illegal. That's invasion of privacy." "What's illegal is fraud," David shot back, abandoning all pretense now. "What's illegal is conspiracy. What's illegal is whatever you and Emma were planning to do once you got Sarah to change her beneficiaries. You want to talk about illegal, Jennifer? Let's talk about that." Jennifer's hand was shaking as she held her phone, and David saw her typing frantically, probably warning Emma. But it was too late to stop this now. The confrontation was happening whether he was ready or not. "I don't know what you think you know," Jennifer said, her voice shaking with rage. "But you have no proof of anything. Emma is Sarah's daughter. She has every right to want security, to want to be included in her mother's estate planning. There's nothing wrong with that. You're just a controlling husband who doesn't want anyone else having a claim on his wife's money." The accusation stung because it was exactly what Emma and Jennifer would argue if this went to court. That David was the bad guy, trying to keep Sarah's biological daughter from her rightful place in the family. But then Sarah was there, standing up from the counter and walking over to them. "Hi, Jennifer," she said calmly. "I'm Sarah, Emma's mother, and David's wife, and the person you and Emma were planning to con out of $500,000. Jennifer spun to face Sarah, and David saw genuine fear flicker across her face. "I don't know what he's been telling you," Jennifer started, but Sarah held up a hand. He showed me Emma's journal, Sarah said, her voice steady and cold. The one where she talks about manipulating me, about phases of her plan, about you coaching her on what buttons to push. He showed me your Facebook messages, the ones going back months where you and Emma joke about running game and making bank. He showed me the documents you prepared about changing my will, my life insurance. And we have you on camera from yesterday, asking me to make you my beneficiary. So please, don't insult my intelligence by pretending you don't know what we're talking about. Jennifer's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. Then she seemed to collect herself, her expression hardening into defiance. Fine, she said. You figured it out, congratulations. But you know what? Emma is your daughter, you did abandon her. You did give her away and then live your perfect little life while she grew up with people who didn't want her. So yeah, maybe we thought you owed her something. Maybe we thought she deserved a piece of what you built after you threw her away. The words were designed to hurt, to make Sarah feel guilty, to justify what they'd done. But Sarah didn't flinch. Emma's adoption records are sealed, she said quietly. And her adoptive parents are still married, still living together, still posting happy family photos on Facebook. Emma isn't 17, she's 18. She doesn't live with a neglectful mother and an absent father. She lives 10 minutes from her parents, who by all accounts love her. So the sob story about her terrible childhood. That was a lie, just like everything else. David pulled out his phone and showed Jennifer the screenshots he'd taken of Emma's real Facebook profile, the one with her real age and her real relationship with her adoptive parents. Jennifer's face cycled through emotions: anger, fear, calculation. Okay, she said finally. So maybe we embellished some details, but the core truth is real. Emma is your biological daughter and she deserves. She deserves to be arrested for fraud, David interrupted. Along with you, and that's exactly what's going to happen. We have evidence of your conspiracy. We have recordings of Emma trying to get Sarah to change her will under false pretenses. And now we have you admitting that you were running a con. So you can drop the righteous indignation act, Jennifer. It's over. Jennifer's laugh was bitter. You think you've won? You think you can just go to the police with some journal entries and recordings and they'll arrest us? Good luck with that. Emma is legally Sarah's daughter. Everything she asked for is stuff that families do all the time. And as for me, I'm just a friend. You've got nothing on me that would hold up in court. She was probably right, David realized. They had evidence of suspicious behavior, of lies and manipulation, but proving actual criminal intent would be hard. But Sarah smiled, and it was not a kind smile. You're right, she said. Proving conspiracy to commit murder would be difficult, especially since you haven't actually done anything yet. But you know what's easy to prove: identity theft, fraud, forgery, because those documents you prepared with my financial information and my signatures, I never gave you permission to access that information. I never signed anything, which means someone forged my signature and stole my identity to create those documents. That's a crime, Jennifer, a serious one. Jennifer's face went pale. I didn't forge anything, she said quickly. That was all Emma, I just gave her advice. I didn't actually do anything illegal. And there it was, the crack in the partnership. When faced with real consequences, Jennifer was ready to throw Emma under the bus. David felt a grim satisfaction. So you admit Emma forged documents, he pressed. You admit she was planning to defraud Sarah. I admit nothing, Jennifer snapped. I'm done talking to you. If you want to say anything else to me, you can do it through my lawyer. She turned to leave, but Sarah's voice stopped her. You should probably warn Emma that we know everything, Sarah said conversationally. Oh wait, you already did, didn't you? When David approached you, you started texting her, so she knows we're onto her. Which means when we get home, she'll probably be gone, packed up and disappeared, right? Jennifer's silence was answer enough. Sarah nodded, like this confirmed something she'd suspected. That's what I thought. You and Emma always had an exit strategy, didn't you? If the con got blown, you'd cut your losses and run. Find another mark, start another game. How many times have you done this, Jennifer? How many vulnerable people have you targeted? Go to hell, Jennifer spat, and this time she did leave, pushing past them and out the door of the coffee shop. David and Sarah stood there, watching her go, and David realized his hands were shaking. We need to get home, he said. If Emma's running, we need to make sure she doesn't take anything that doesn't belong to her. Sarah was already heading for the door, and David followed, his mind racing. They'd confronted Jennifer, they'd shown their hand, and now Emma knew they were onto her, which meant the game had changed. They weren't setting traps anymore. They were in damage control mode, trying to minimize the fallout from a con that had nearly worked. As they drove home, David called the police, explaining the situation as calmly as he could. Identity theft, fraud, forgery. The officer on the line said they'd send someone to the house to take a statement. When they pulled into their driveway, Emma's car was gone. David and Sarah ran inside and up to the guest room, and just as Sarah had predicted, Emma had cleared out. The room was empty, all her belongings gone, even the furniture they'd bought for her. It was like she'd never been there at all. Sarah stood in the middle of the empty room, and David saw her shoulders shaking. "I'm so stupid," she whispered. "I wanted to believe in her so badly that I ignored every red flag. I put us in danger because I was desperate for redemption." David wrapped his arms around his wife, holding her while she cried. "You're not stupid," he said firmly. "You're human. They targeted you specifically because of your past, because they knew you'd be vulnerable to this kind of manipulation. That's not your fault, Sarah. It's theirs." Sarah cried harder, letting out months of suppressed emotions, grief and betrayal and anger all mixed together. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red but determined. "We're going to get them," she said. "We're going to make sure they can't do this to anyone else." David nodded. "Yes," he agreed. "We are." The police arrived 20 minutes later, and David and Sarah spent the next 3 hours giving statements, showing evidence, explaining the elaborate con that Emma and Jennifer had tried to pull. The officers took it seriously, especially when they saw the forged documents and the evidence of identity theft. They'd put out a warrant for Emma Morrison and Jennifer Hayes. Whether they'd be caught was another question. Women like that, skilled con artists with exit strategies and false identities, they knew how to disappear. But at least Sarah and David had stopped them before anyone got seriously hurt. At least they'd protected themselves and their assets. And maybe, just maybe, they'd prevented Emma and Jennifer from doing this to someone else. As the police left and David and Sarah stood in their empty house, the house that had felt too crowded just yesterday and now felt too empty, Sarah turned to her husband. "I need you to know," she said quietly, "that I choose you. I chose her over you for a while and that was wrong, but I'm choosing you now, I'm choosing us, and I'm never going to let anyone come between us again." David pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I choose you too," he said. "Always." They'd been through hell, had their marriage tested in ways they never imagined. But they'd survived. And maybe, David thought, they'd come out stronger on the other side. Time would tell. For now, they had each other, and that was enough. The weeks that followed Emma's disappearance were some of the hardest of David and Sarah's marriage, and that was saying something considering what they'd just been through. The police investigation moved slowly, frustratingly so. Emma Morrison and Jennifer Hayes had vanished without a trace, and as David had suspected, they were professionals at disappearing. Emma's car was found abandoned in a grocery store parking lot 3 towns over, wiped clean of fingerprints. Her phone was turned off, her social media accounts deleted. Jennifer's apartment, when police finally got a warrant to search it, was completely empty except for some furniture that had come with the place. They were ghosts. But what the police did find, when they started digging deeper, made David's blood run cold and made Sarah physically sick. Emma Morrison wasn't even Emma's real name. Her birth certificate, the one that matched Sarah's daughter, belonged to a girl who had died in a car accident at age 3, 17 years ago. The real Emma, Sarah's biological daughter, had passed away before she'd even started school. Someone, at some point, had stolen that dead child's identity, and the girl who'd lived in their house had been using it for years. The DNA test that had seemed to prove Emma was Sarah's daughter. Faked. Completely fabricated using a fake account and photoshopped results. Sarah had sobbed when Detective Morrison, the officer handling their case, explained this to them. "So I never met my daughter," she'd said, her voice breaking. "My real daughter died when she was 3 years old and I didn't even know. I've spent 17 years thinking she was out there somewhere, living her life, and she was gone the whole time." It was a grief on top of a grief, a betrayal layered over loss. David had held his wife while she processed this new, devastating information, and he'd felt his own heart break for her. The detective had more information, though, and it got worse. "We've identified the woman who was using Emma Morrison's identity," Detective Morrison said, showing them a photo. It was the girl they'd known as Emma, but in the photo she looked different, harder. Her real name is Cassidy Grant. She's 22 years old, not 17 or 18, and she's wanted in 3 other states for similar cons. She works with Jennifer Hayes and sometimes with other partners to target vulnerable people. Usually women with money, who have some kind of emotional wound that can be exploited. 22. The girl they'd welcomed into their home, the girl Sarah had mothered and nurtured, was a 22-year-old con artist. David felt sick. How many others have they done this to? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Detective Morrison hesitated. That we know of, at least 7. The pattern is always similar. They research the target, find an emotional vulnerability, and exploit it. Sometimes it's a lost child, like with you. Sometimes it's a dead spouse, or an estranged family member, or a dream that never came true. They find the wound and they pick at it until the target is so desperate to believe in the fantasy, they're selling that they ignore all the warning signs. And the end game is always money? David asked. The detective nodded. Usually. They get themselves written into wills, made beneficiaries on insurance policies, given access to bank accounts. Sometimes they just drain the accounts and disappear. But there have been 2 cases in other states where the targets died under suspicious circumstances shortly after changing their estate plans. Both deaths were ruled accidents, but the circumstances were questionable. A fall down the stairs. A car accident where the brakes mysteriously failed. Nothing that could be proven as murder, but the timing was suspicious. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. They were going to kill me, she breathed. If we hadn't figured it out, if David hadn't found that journal, they were actually going to kill me. David pulled her closer, his own hands shaking with the realization of how close they'd come to tragedy. We're building a case, Detective Morrison said. With your evidence and evidence from the other victims, we're hoping to get enough for federal charges. Interstate fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. When we catch them, and we will catch them, they'll be facing serious prison time. When, not if. David appreciated the detective's confidence, but he had his doubts. Cassidy and Jennifer had proven themselves skilled at vanishing. Still, he thanked the detective and promised to cooperate fully with the investigation. After he left, David and Sarah sat in their living room in silence, processing everything they'd learned. I never even met my real daughter, Sarah finally said. She died when she was 3, and I never knew. I've been mourning a loss I didn't even know I'd suffered. David didn't know what to say to that, so he just held her hand and let her cry. That night, Sarah asked if they could find out where their real daughter was buried. It took some digging and some phone calls to the adoption agency, but they eventually learned that Emma, their real biological daughter, was buried in a cemetery about an hour away. The adoptive parents had moved out of state years ago, but they'd left their daughter resting in the town where they'd lived when she passed. The following Saturday, David and Sarah drove to the cemetery together. They brought flowers, white roses, because Sarah said that's what she would have brought if she'd known, if she'd been able to mourn her daughter properly all those years ago. The grave was small and simple, marked with a headstone that read Emma Rose Morrison, beloved daughter, gone too soon. Sarah stood there for a long time, just staring at the dates. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. That's how long her daughter had lived. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered, kneeling down and placing the roses against the headstone. I'm sorry I gave you away. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry I didn't even know you were gone. She was crying again, but these tears felt different to David, cleaner somehow, like she was finally grieving the right loss, the real loss. Instead of the fantasy Cassidy had sold her. I would have loved you, Sarah continued. If I'd kept you, if I'd been braver, I would have loved you so much, and I'm sorry I didn't get the chance. David knelt beside his wife and put his arm around her. He didn't try to stop her tears or tell her it would be okay. He just sat with her in her grief, bearing witness to it, letting her finally mourn the daughter she'd lost twice, once by choice and once by fate. They stayed at the cemetery for over an hour, and when they finally left, Sarah seemed different. Quieter, but also somehow lighter. Like she'd put down a burden she'd been carrying for 17 years. In the car on the way home, Sarah turned to David and said, I need to forgive myself, for giving her up, for falling for Cassidy's con, for all of it. I've been punishing myself for so long, feeling guilty for so long, that I made myself vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation Cassidy was selling. My guilt made me an easy target. David reached over and took her hand. How do you plan to do that? Forgive yourself? Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. Therapy, she finally said. Real therapy, with someone who specializes in grief and trauma. And time. And being honest with myself about what I can and can't control. David squeezed her hand. I think that's a good plan, he said. And for what it's worth, I forgive you too. For not trusting me when I raised concerns, for choosing Cassidy over our marriage for a while. I know you were hurting and vulnerable. I forgive you. Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. I don't know if I deserve that, she whispered. But thank you. And David, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I put you through, for what I put us through. I know, David said. And we're going to be okay. We're going to get through this and be stronger for it. I believe that. He wasn't sure if he was trying to convince Sarah or himself, but saying the words out loud made them feel more true. They would get through this. They would heal. They would rebuild what Cassidy and Jennifer had tried to destroy. The healing process was slow and not always linear. Sarah started therapy the following week, twice-a-week sessions with a woman who specialized in complicated grief and trauma. She threw herself into the work of understanding her own patterns, her own wounds, her own part in what had happened. David supported her however he could, but he also recognized that he had his own processing to do. He'd spent months feeling like he was losing his wife, feeling dismissed and sidelined in his own marriage. That had left scars too. So David started therapy as well, and eventually he and Sarah started couples counseling. They talked about trust and communication, about boundaries and red flags, about how to protect their relationship while still remaining open to other people. It was hard work, sometimes painful, but it was also necessary. They learned how to fight fair, how to voice concerns without accusation, how to listen to each other even when the truth was uncomfortable. 3 months after Cassidy and Jennifer disappeared, Detective Morrison called with news. They'd been arrested. Cassidy had been picked up trying to cross into Canada with a fake passport, and Jennifer had been found in a motel in Nevada, apparently abandoned by her partner when things got too hot. They were both in custody, facing multiple federal charges across 4 states. With the evidence David and Sarah had provided, along with evidence from other victims, the prosecutor was confident they'd both be going to prison for a long time. Sarah's reaction to the news surprised David. He'd expected relief, maybe satisfaction, but instead she just looked sad. I know they're criminals, she said. I know they hurt us and other people, but I can't help wondering what happened to them, what kind of life leads someone to do what they did. Cassidy was so young, 22. What kind of damage does a person have to experience to become that calculating, that willing to hurt others? David understood what she meant. It was hard not to wonder about the human story behind the crime. Hurt people, David said, something his therapist had told him. That doesn't excuse what they did, but it might explain it. Cassidy and Jennifer made their choices and now they'll face the consequences. That's justice. But you don't have to hate them, Sarah. You can acknowledge their humanity while still protecting yourself from them. Sarah nodded slowly. I don't think I'll go to the trial, she said. I don't need to see them again. I just need to let this go and move forward. David agreed. They provided their evidence and their statements to the prosecutor, but when the trial date came months later, they didn't attend. They read about the verdict in the newspaper. Both women found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Cassidy Grant was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Jennifer Hayes got 12. It was over. Really, finally over. By the time the verdict came down, David and Sarah had already started rebuilding their life. They'd redecorated the guest room, turning it into a home office for Sarah so she could work from home more often. They'd started a weekly date night tradition, just the two of them, no phones, no distractions. They'd taken a vacation, just a long weekend at a bed and breakfast in wine country, where they'd reconnected and remembered why they'd fallen in love in the first place. They talked about having children eventually, but they agreed to wait. They needed more time to heal, more time to strengthen their marriage before adding the stress and chaos of a baby. Maybe in a year or 2, they'd revisit the conversation. For now, they were focused on each other, on being partners again instead of 2 people living parallel lives. One evening, almost a year after Cassidy had first entered their lives, Sarah and David were sitting on their back porch watching the sunset. Max and Charlie were sprawled at their feet, and Sarah was curled up against David's side, his arm around her shoulders. Do you think we're going to be okay? Sarah asked quietly. It was a question she'd asked before, in different ways, and David knew it came from a place of lingering insecurity about whether their marriage could really survive what they'd been through. "I think we already are okay," David answered. "Not perfect, not without scars, but okay. We survived something that destroys a lot of marriages, Sarah. We faced betrayal and manipulation and danger, and we came through it together. That counts for something." Sarah tilted her head up to look at him. "I love you," she said. "I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you so much, and I'm grateful every day that you didn't give up on me, on us." "I love you too," David said, kissing her forehead. "Always have, always will." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together, just existing in the peace they'd fought so hard to reclaim. "I've been thinking," Sarah said eventually, "about the other victims, the other people Cassidy and Jennifer conned. The detective said there were at least 7 that they knew of. I wonder if any of them would want to talk, to share their experiences. Sometimes it helps to know you're not alone." David considered this. "You want to reach out to them?" Sarah nodded. "Maybe, through the Victim Services Coordinator or something official, not to dwell on what happened, but to help each other heal, to turn something awful into something potentially good." David smiled. This was the Sarah he'd married, the woman who looked for ways to help others even while dealing with her own pain. "I think that's a beautiful idea," he said. "If you want to do it, I support you completely." Sarah did reach out, through proper channels, and it turned out several of the other victims did want to connect. They formed a small support group, meeting online once a month to share their stories and their healing journeys. David sat in on a few of the meetings, and he was struck by how similar all the stories were. Different details, different vulnerabilities that had been exploited, but the same pattern of manipulation and betrayal. And yet, despite what they'd been through, these people were survivors. They were choosing to heal, to grow, to not let what happened define them. That, David realized, was the real lesson in all of this. Not that you should never trust anyone, not that every stranger is a threat, not that opening your heart is dangerous. The lesson was that bad things can happen to anyone, that even smart. Capable people can be manipulated if someone finds the right wound to exploit. But surviving betrayal doesn't have to mean becoming bitter or closed off. It can mean becoming wiser, more discerning, more compassionate toward yourself and others. Sarah had been vulnerable because she carried guilt and grief over a decision she'd made when she was 19 years old. Cassidy had exploited that guilt masterfully. But the answer wasn't for Sarah to never forgive herself or never be open to connection again. The answer was for her to process that guilt in healthy ways, to forgive herself genuinely, so that wound couldn't be used against her anymore. And she was doing that work every day in therapy and in life. David had learned lessons too. He'd learned to trust his instincts, to speak up even when it was uncomfortable, to insist on being heard in his own marriage. He'd also learned that loving someone means sometimes watching them make mistakes and being there to help pick up the pieces, rather than saying, "I told you so." It meant being patient with healing, even when it's messy and slow. 2 years after everything happened, David and Sarah hosted a small dinner party. Just a few close friends, people who'd supported them through the whole ordeal. As David looked around the table at the people laughing and talking, as he felt Sarah's hand slip into his under the table and squeeze gently, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, complete peace. They'd been through hell, but they'd made it out the other side. Their marriage was stronger, their communication better, their commitment to each other unshakable. Later that night, after their friends had gone home and they were cleaning up together, Sarah stopped in the middle of drying a dish and turned to David. "I'm ready," she said. David looked at her, confused. "Ready for what?" Sarah smiled, and it was a real smile, full of hope and joy and none of the shadows that had haunted her for so long. "To try for a baby, if you still want to. I'm ready to be a mother the right way this time. Not out of guilt or a desperate need for redemption, but because I genuinely want to bring a child into the world and raise them with you." David set down the plate he was holding and pulled his wife into his arms. "Are you sure?" he asked. "You don't have to prove anything, Sarah. You don't have to do this to make up for the past." Sarah shook her head. "I'm not trying to make up for anything. I've forgiven myself for giving up Emma. I've mourned her. And now I'm ready to move forward to create something new and beautiful with you, if you want that too." Did he want that? David had thought he'd wanted children before all of this happened, but he'd set that dream aside during their healing process. Now, looking at his wife's hopeful face, he realized the dream hadn't died. It had just been waiting for the right time. "Yes," he said. "I want that. I want that very much." Sarah's answering smile was brighter than the sun, and when she kissed him, David tasted salt and realized she was crying. But these were happy tears, tears of hope and new beginnings, and he kissed her back with all the love and commitment he felt. The story of what happened with Cassidy and Jennifer would always be part of their history. It had marked them, changed them, taught them hard lessons, but it didn't define them. They'd taken the worst betrayal either of them had experienced and used it as an opportunity to grow, to strengthen their marriage, to become better versions of themselves. And that, David thought, was the ultimate victory. Not just surviving, but thriving in spite of everything. If there was a moral to their story, it was this. Betrayal is devastating, but it doesn't have to be the end. Manipulation can make you question everything, but it can also teach you to trust yourself more deeply. Grief and guilt are heavy burdens, but forgiving yourself is possible, even when it seems impossible. And love, real love, the kind built on honesty and communication and genuine partnership, that kind of love can survive anything. David and Sarah's journey wasn't over. They'd face new challenges, new joys, new sorrows. But whatever came next, they'd face it together as partners, as equals, as two people who'd been tested by fire and emerged stronger. And really, that was all anyone could ask for. Not a perfect life, but a real one. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of love strong enough to carry you through it. As they finished cleaning up the kitchen and turned out the lights, David took one last look at their home. It had been violated by strangers, filled with lies and manipulation, turned into a stage for someone else's con. But they'd reclaimed it. They'd filled it with truth and love and the promise of a future they'd build together. The guest room that had housed a con artist would someday, hopefully, be a nursery for their child. The dining room table, where Cassidy had performed her manipulations, would be where their family shared meals and made memories. They'd taken back their life, their home, their marriage, and their future. And that, David thought as he followed Sarah upstairs to bed, was the greatest revenge of all. Not matching Cassidy's cruelty with cruelty of their own, but refusing to let what she'd done destroy the beautiful life they were building. Choosing love over bitterness. Choosing trust over cynicism. Choosing to believe in the possibility of good things, even after experiencing something so profoundly bad. "Good night," Sarah whispered as they settled into bed, her head on David's chest, his arms around her. "I love you." David kissed the top of her head. "I love you too. Sleep well." And for the first time in 2 years, he did sleep well, dreamlessly and peacefully, with his wife safe in his arms and the future bright with possibility ahead of them. The nightmare was over. The healing would continue. And tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that, they'd wake up and choose each other again, building their happiness one day at a time together.